Hi, I'm Jane Garibay, representative for the 60th District, Windsor and Windsor Locks. Welcome to On the Porch. I'm very excited today to have Representative Christin McCarthy Vahey, who is a fellow representative from Fairfield's 133rd Assembly District. She is the House Chair of Planning and Development Committee and serves on the Transportation and Government Administration and Elections Committee, three heavy committees. In her fourth term as a legislator, having served previously at the local level as an RTM member and selectman, she is also a social worker and she co-chairs Fairfield's CARES Community Coalition, Local Prevention Council, and Suicide Prevention Trainer. Welcome, Christin. So happy to have you here today.
Representative Garibay, it is such a pleasure to be able to be here with you.
I'm so excited. I don't know anyone that knows more about planning and development than you do. So from your background, you wouldn't have known that, but boy, you sure do know your materials. So
well, thanks for saying that. As we were talking before the show, it's teamwork. It's very much teamwork, and all of the amazing people who've worked for so many years and have been my teachers. So I'm learning. I have a lot more to learn, but I think that'll be true until the day I die.
But to get good anything done, you do need the teamwork. You need to work with other people to get it done. And yesterday was a big success, I think, in the House of Representatives with HB 6107. And so I invited you today because there's a lot of myths and, there are the facts. And bills start out one way and then they transition in the way they end up when they come to the floor, because you do work with other people and you want it to be something everybody can support. So I wanted to go over some of those today because we, as you know, we get emails either pro or con. I was excited to get quite a few in favor of this, the way the bill actually came out yesterday. So we'll dig right in if that's okay with you.
Sounds great.
The Planning and Development Committee's proposed bill would end our local decision-making on zoning and land use. In our little towns of like Windsor and Windsor Lock, that was a concern that we're going to lose control. We won't be able to. We're not like the big cities. So what can you tell me?
So Representative Garibay, I just want to clarify that you're sharing that as a myth, as opposed
to a myth. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
So thanks for asking that question. As I said many, many times on the floor of the House during our debate or our conversation yesterday, the zoning enabling statute, which is the 8-2 portion of our law, has been in place for 100 years. So actually for 100 years, the state has been clear with municipalities. This is what you may do with zoning. This is what you have to do. And this is what you absolutely can't do. That's been in place for 100 years already. It's actually the state that gives the municipalities their authority to zone. There are 2 communities in our state that actually don't have zoning. And what that means is that people can build whatever they want, wherever they want. What zoning does is it helps us figure out how we want to use the land and what we want to place upon the land, essentially, and where we want it to be. So the bill that we had before us yesterday actually gave communities additional powers that they don't have now. Well, it would give if we're able to pass it and get it signed into law. And it addressed areas in each of those 3 parts of that law in the what we call the shall not, and the may sections. Right. It also had a provision for accessory dwelling units that would require that they be as of right is the term. As of right doesn't mean that there's no local control. It means that locally, the town planning and zoning or the zoning commission would decide the regulations through a public hearing process, which is done locally. And then it would be locally hired professionals who would make the determination if those regulations were being met. And then those homeowners or those who wanted to have that accessory dwelling unit would then be given that opportunity or that property right, really. Even for that, there's an opt-out provision for municipalities in the law. So to my mind, there's so much that the municipalities are making these decisions.
I think their right.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely. And like I said, in some cases, it even added rights that they didn't already have from the state.
that's pretty awesome. What kind of dwellings are those that you're talking about?
So yesterday I kept calling them ADUs, and people have heard me referring to them. ADUs is an accessory dwelling unit. In our law, we actually define it as accessory apartment, but most people call them mother-in-law suites, and they can be either attached to your home or detached. For folks, for example, who might have a detached garage that they convert then to a small apartment. That's what an accessory dwelling unit is. And the law would limit the size. So if you had,
Right.
and it was for every single family residence. So if you had a single family residence and you had one of those detached garages and you wanted to be able to create an accessory dwelling unit with some other restrictions, things that are in place locally now and that would be in place through those local regulations. But that's really what it is. Technical term, mother-in-law apartment, or as I said, father-in-law apartment too.
Right, right, which is so important, and becoming more important. Um, and I think these regulations, a little off, but um, when there is a place, I'm not going to name the location because that wouldn't be fair, but up until 20 years ago, you could bury an old car into the ground and put a pipe to it, and that was your septic tank.
Oh, wow.
So that's the reason why we have the regulations, the regulations that we do put in, whether it's the town or the state, is to protect from things like that. Yeah, believe it or not.
Do. Well, and
Yeah,
Garibay, if I may add, and cut me off anytime you want because
no,
I talk about zoning all day long. But the statutes that we had already had a number of requirements in them, and I think just a lot of people aren't familiar with the law and what was already in place, even if we weren't passing. But those things that what you just talked about is an example of how those frameworks seek to protect the public health and safety and welfare, and in that case specifically the environment. And we've heard from many folks who say that the bill would hurt our environment. In fact, the opposite is true. Part of what good planning does is to help to assure that we are protecting the environment. And the bill that we passed out of the House yesterday actually gives communities additional tools to be able to better protect our environment.
right. And that's why, as we go through some of these questions that I have, that it's important because there's a lot of different agendas out there, and there's a lot of information that's good information and not so good information, and that people have to weed through that. And going to your state representative or state senator is a really good idea because if they don't know the exact answer, they will go out and they will find it. Um, so that's really good. So there is a myth, which you just kind of answered, that would eliminate the local control over accessory dwelling units. It actually seems like it opens it up a little bit, you
So
know,
the accessory dwelling unit portion of the bill that we passed would, as I said, allow an accessory dwelling unit attached or detached as of right with any single family residence in the state. And many of our communities are already doing this. But if a community decided, and I hope they won't, because what you
right,
said, Representative, is so true. We need these more and more. We have a housing shortage in our state, and we also have an aging population.
right,
And we're seeing more of them being built here in Fairfield. And we also know that of 18 to 34-year-olds, about 40% of them are living at home with their parents right now. So those are two groups of our population who would benefit from this opportunity. But if a community decided we don't want to allow the folks in our towns to have that property right, and that's what it is, that's a property right, that they could choose through a proactive process to opt out of that portion of the statute of the law.
so that is really, really good. It says also one of the myths out there is that this bill would impose new, potentially costly, unfunded mandates for training and assimilating local regulations.
So the training portion of the bill is new. It would require that our land use commissioners be trained, have 4 hours of training every other year. And it sets forth a list of what those parts of training could be, not what it has to be. And then a list of groups that can provide the training. Just stepping back for a moment, if I may, why is training important for our land use commissioners? Because they make quasi-judicial, they have hearings that are quasi-judicial hearings and make decisions about how we use our land, decisions that impact for 5, 10, 20, sometimes 50 plus years. And so for them to fully understand and know the law, how the law works, to understand the framework of the statute, part of what we did yesterday was to reorganize the law so it was less confusing to those volunteer commissioners who really do amazing work for our communities. But that training would be, again, a requirement every other year. And there are a number of organizations who have already expressed that they are willing to host those trainings for communities. And in fact, a number of organizations who already do so, the Bar Association and Yukon. And commissioners, many avail themselves of the opportunity. But now we have our municipal organizations, CCM, which is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. And in fact, I think all but 1 or 2 cities and towns are a member of CCM, and COS, which is our small towns. And they are both interested in engaging in this and helping to provide this training for our communities.
Well, I think it is so very important when I think of, every town has their commissioners and their commissions who are volunteer and do a lot of work. But the 2 that stand out, and we had 2 bills this year. One is this one, working with zoning, and the other was our housing authorities, because they, the same thing we put through, that they have to have mandatory training. It goes through HUD. HUD already provides it free of charge. So it's an easy, because you're directly affecting people's lives. It's making changes, like you said, they vote to do. So I was really excited to see that in this bill. I think the more training we can all get to understand is really, really important.
Well, if I may add one other thing, I just do want to thank CCM in particular and COST as well for their partnership in that. And it's really wonderful that they're willing and eager to help make sure that happens for our communities.
Right. That is awesome. That is awesome. So next one, the myth is this bill will hurt the environment, which you spoke briefly about, but by overriding the local voice of municipalities who host waterways and open space.
Well, in fact, this bill strengthens some of the language specifically related to the Long Island Sound in particular. The bill already, or the law already had that communities needed to pay attention to the impacts on Long Island Sound, but it was just those communities that were immediately contiguous or coastal communities. This bill actually added communities that are along what we are calling navigable waterways. So those large rivers, the Connecticut River, communities whose living does impact the water, and that water then feeds into the sound. And we're all connected. As I said yesterday, water doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't care, but it absolutely impacts all of us. So we know that the health of our coastline, it absolutely, the here in Fairfield, we have Mill River, and we have the Mill River Association, and they talk about our wetlands and the impact they have on helping address climate, helping address sea level rise, and it's all connected. So we actually strengthened that provision as one. The other thing that we did was, again, give communities an additional capacity to require, when they're creating their local regulations, energy efficiency and provide incentives. That the incentives piece was already in there, that they could promote it, but just the change of that one word, that we are now allowing them to require it. So we're giving them that authority to say, not just you can promote this and say it's a good idea. Now we're saying you're allowed to, as a community, choose if you actually want to require these things as part of the building process.
I know my Windsor Action Climate group will be very happy to hear that. And it's true, what happens in northern Vermont on the Connecticut River coming down affects everybody along the way, which makes its way to the ocean, and it's so important. Um, so that is really good. The other myth is it'll hurt our traffic flow and parking.
So there have been many different bills that the Planning and Development Committee heard this year, a lot of different proposals. And one of the real misunderstandings is that people continued to say that there were certain provisions in the bill, even after they had already been taken out in committee. And we heard over and over, well, they could come back, they could come back. They didn't. The one provision in the bill that people are probably referring to with that is related to parking requirements. We know that parking is one of the most costly aspects of development, and paved parking is also an environmental issue. But we also know that unfortunately we are not a state that has all of the types of transportation infrastructure we need for people to have as much public transportation access as I might like them to, and you might like them to. So what the bill did was change the parking maximums requirements. For a 1-bedroom unit, it would be no more than 1 parking space, and for a 2-bedroom unit, no more than 2. But again, a community can choose to go through a process if they so decide to opt out of that requirement. And again, this is something that is designed to help address affordability and costs as well as the environment.
So it actually makes the requirement less.
Well, part of the concern that you're talking about, and I don't want to say, maybe not a myth as much as a concern that people have had, well, there just won't be enough parking for people if we don't require this many parking spaces when we're building facilities. But there's a lot of research, and I think making data informed decisions is really important.
Absolutely.
That's where that comes from. But also there's the sense that how we choose to travel is going to continue to evolve. So we're going to be having driverless vehicles, over time. We hope to have more electric buses over time. We hope to increase our train capacity in the state. We've had bills in transportation this session. And that, those things are going to continue to evolve. But even in this present moment, what are the parking needs, particularly when you have a multifamily dwelling? And
Right.
So again, this was based on that best practice research. However, communities who find themselves in different situations or just prefer to not have that requirement in place can choose to opt out of it. They have to go through an intentional process and really think through. And I think that's important. They have to think it through. They have to address it. Whereas before, maybe those parking requirements that a community has, that's just what we've always done. And we haven't really thought about it and we haven't addressed it. Now this really calls a community to take that issue on and think about what it means for their community and then make a decision.
I'm actually really excited about it because my 2 towns of Windsor and Windsor Locks are very involved with transit-oriented development, with housing, in the centers of our town, and parking space, 3 space we don't have an abundance of parking, right? So to have it to be able to be a little bit less and encouraging people to use the train to go into Hartford, to go to Springfield, and to do these different things. And I am finding that many of the younger people that are new young professionals, they don't want to even own a car if they don't have to. And especially if they're coming from Boston or New York where they never had to, they get here and it's like, oh my God, now I have to have the expense of a car, the insurance, etc. So allowing a town to be able to adjust that, I think is really important. So that's a really good. One of the last, there's a couple more myths that are out there and I just want to touch on them. It would drive up residency at a rate which outplaces the local resources and services such as police, fire, and schools.
This is a tough one. I heard yesterday in questions on the floor the concern about the fact that we have net out migration in Connecticut, which we don't at this point, but our population growth in Connecticut has declined and then remained steady. We want people to move to our state. I want people to come to Connecticut. This is an amazing state. Fairfield is an amazing place. Windsor, Windsor Locks, amazing places. We do have 169 tremendous communities, and I hope that more and more people will choose to live here with us and be our neighbors and create the kind of communities that we love and we're so very blessed to serve. We have to develop in a smart way, and we have to plan. You know, I did say yesterday, the bill that we passed was not primarily an affordable housing bill. It was a planning bill
Right.
and a zoning bill. And what that means is it helps us to create the framework for going forward. Infrastructure concerns are real. We talked about wastewater during the debate yesterday and throughout the course of this session. How we deal with wastewater, how we deal with transportation infrastructure, how we deal, and not just roads, because, you know, when we talk about parking or infrastructure, it isn't all just about the car. We need to think about people who are now using electric bikes to get around, or people who've always been
Right.
using bicycles, people who want to walk and actually walk as, you know, part of their commute, for example. So when we think about how and where we develop, and you think about the fact that there are certainly places that tend to have more density, and they tend to be along the train lines, and they tend to be along the highway routes. In fact, I use this example often. If you remember the early maps of COVID and where COVID was spreading in our state, it tracked right along the I-95 corridor and up 91, along the 91 corridor and up through the valley, the train. You could literally see that because that's where our population is. So of course we have to plan for the infrastructure, but the idea of schools, I'll take that one on as well. Many of our districts have seen declining school enrollment. And I know a lot of communities get concerned about, well, the cost of educating children. What's the cost of not growing our population?
Right.
We know that we have an aging population here in Connecticut. And we know that growing our population actually expands the tax base and saves money for taxpayers who are now part of a larger base. So I think you have to plan. You have to be smart about preparing that infrastructure, but it is doable. And that's why we have to create these foundations and think these things through so that as we do encourage more people and hopefully see more people as we have coming from New York during COVID, I mean, that's impacted us here in Fairfield County very significantly, but not just Fairfield County, other places too. I know up by you as well. So I think that's one that's, it's sometimes we use that as a way to say, well, we can't do this, but we can, we just have to plan for it and invest in the right ways.
Right. And when we say affordable housing, we also mean working class people affordable. In Windsor Locks, the building they did, it's 100 and I think 130 units, and 60% of it is affordable housing. So that means a teacher that's just starting out and earning $38,000 a year can afford to continue to live in the community she grew up on. I know I want Connecticut to be where my kids can stay and do, because I agree. You know, we're so proud in Windsor, Windsor Locks, because we're 2 hours from New York, 2 hours from Boston. You know, we have the airport, we're right on the river, right on the highway. So we have all those pluses, and we do have to think through it and plan, and we plan 10, 20 years out, right? You know?
Right. Can I just say that building in Windsor Locks, I've had the opportunity to tour it, and I said, wow, I would love to live here. Absolutely beautiful. The job
I would too. It's amazing.
Yeah, and the location is incredible. And this is a great example of how, you know, we can do good projects when we work together and plan well. And that's part of what this is about, is being intentional in doing that and in addressing exactly what you said, Representative, the affordability for all levels of affordability, and for the people who are working here in our communities, who are serving our communities, who help make our communities what they are. I mean, our teachers, oh my gosh, this year especially, as a parent, I think about what our teachers have done. and how they've held it together for our kids and our families.
Right.
And we want them to be able to live here where they work.
I appreciate everyone so much more when you think that even like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, they were frontline workers. They went to work every day and they were open. And it was good to be able to give my husband projects to do. So I really appreciate it. Um, he may not have, but there's just you're right, just so much. And there's so many people that are service oriented that make our lives easier every day that may not be the higher wage earners that, they should be able to live, you know. So, okay, the other one it says, which is concerning, and I hadn't heard this one until recently, that the bill strengthens, and this is a myth, the bill strengthens the hands of developers who have been exploiting the state's affordable housing statute to override local zoning laws.
So I talked a lot in the past few weeks about the difference between 8-2, which is the umbrella that regulates all land use, whether it's industrial, residential, commercial, any of it. And then 830G, which is a separate, you see the 8 is before both of them. So they're connected, but it's a separate part of the law. That's that affordable housing appeals process where a developer in a town that has less than 10% of their housing as affordable housing can come in and can override local zoning to build an affordable housing development. Of course, public health and safety and wetlands issues are the exceptions to that.
Right.
If there are issues there, then they cannot override those issues. And there are a lot of communities like my own who have felt tremendous frustration because of that. The bill, the 8-2 statute, does not touch the 830G law, except for one slight piece about the accessory dwelling units, but it's really just to make sure that communities weren't negatively impacted by additions of accessory dwelling units when it comes to that calculation. But I think Representative Garibay, that is a connected but separate conversation. So
Okay.
830G doesn't go away. The bill itself is not changing that. What the bill itself does is to help let communities know and underscore, again, what already has been in statute for many years about what the need is to address diversity of housing stock and availability for every community in the state. I'm not sure I fully answered your question. I may have forgotten part of it, so forgive me if I did, and feel free to remind me.
No, that does sound logical, and I'm just so excited that you were here today to help myth bust to do. And you can read these bills on the state website. So you can go right on there. And if you need help, again, contact your your state rep through their office, and someone can help you find these. If you want to go into the weeds of reading through some of these bills. Well, it was an exciting day. I saw the happiness of my fellow reps. We're happy every time we get a bill passed. That's good for our citizens. But yesterday was especially, and then to hear from some of my businesses, et cetera, and individuals saying, this is a great bill. Thank you very much for voting yes. As you must have gotten also. And you've been working on this for a long time though, haven't you? People don't realize.
Well, Representative Garibay, as I said at the beginning, every bill like this or any bill that passes is teamwork in a big, big way. The former ranking member of the committee, Representative Zawistowski, and I were talking about the bill afterwards, and she also mentioned on the floor that the reorganization aspect of the legislation has been worked on in some form or another in the Planning and Development Committee for over at least 7 years. And again, that's the part to help make it a little less confusing for people. But other aspects of the bill have been worked on as proposed legislation for 3 years. And prior to that, there was a working group for 2 years. So a lot of this work has been ongoing work. And I will say it will be ongoing work because the needs are so great and it's not going to go away. As I said to someone this session, as long as there are humans on the planet, we will be talking about land use regulation, how we share the planet with each other, how we share space with our pollinators, our birds and our
Right.
bees and our animals, you know, and I'm not even joking at all. I'm being very serious about that. How we, you know, preserve and protect the land that needs to be protected, but also how we protect and support the people who need to have a place to live and grow and thrive and develop in community. We will be talking about this for years and decades to come.
Right. I know when the town has purchased open space in our town to make it open space, it is the one time it is a town meeting. It's usually full. And whether they're independents, Republicans, Democrats, unaffiliated, it is always a unanimous vote and everybody hugging and just so happy afterwards. So protecting our earth, I think, is important to all of us. And I just want to tell people, when I have a chance, I do say it, that a bill starts out like everything, including the kitchen sink, right? It's everything's thrown in there. And when you see that, some people freak out. I could freak out if I didn't know better. But it's through working, as you said, in a working group with it's usually bipartisan and working together and trying to take everybody's different ideas, put them together and come out with a finished product. And that's why many times you can't say, I'll say I support the concept, but until the bill comes out and I see what it really has in it, sometimes you can't make your decision. But it's a long process. It encompasses so much, and many people, as you said, are involved in that finished product. So
Yes.
kudos. You're probably glad that one's over.
Well, it's again,
Well, it's the
step,
beginning
but
of right.
I'm very, very grateful. And I've said it's not even a beginning. It's just it's a part of the journey, and
Part of the journey.
I'm very grateful for the support that it has received, because the hope is that it will help our communities, and that it will empower our communities. Back to your earlier question, we want to empower communities. And we want to give them the tools they need. I have another bill in planning and development that is related to GIS. We have all these wonky things in P&D, as we call it. But GIS is geographic information systems. And many people don't know what that is. And it's just like wastewater. You count on it every single day, even if you know nothing about it and don't know what it is. It's part of that the infrastructure, the tools that we rely on. If you use Google Maps, it's GIS. If you're going to, closing on a house, there's been GIS used to know where the land boundaries are. If you call 911, they're using GIS. When you tried to find an appointment for your vaccine, it used GIS. And so we have a bill to help create a better infrastructure in our state to give communities more tools and more support to do the work they need with public health, public safety, land use, all that planning. So it's exciting.
Right. We have to be grateful because we don't think of that on an everyday basis. Where does our wastewater go? I never think about it. I'm not like at the sink saying, oh, where's this going? We don't think all the time where our water comes from, where our food comes from. It's important for children to learn that an egg comes from a hen, just where do things. So that's the thought we're going to leave with people with today, is to think and be grateful about all that we do have, and maybe think a little bit, how do we have it? How do we get rid of it, etc. So I just want to thank you so much. We went a little over, but it's just such an important subject. And again, congratulations. You were standing on the floor for a long time. And thank you for all that you do, not just in planning and development, but as a legislator for the state of Connecticut.
Well, Representative Garibay, thank you for inviting me to join you today. And if I remember, I'll bring you some eggs from our chickens in the backyard.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you so much. Have a great day. And I want to thank everyone for viewing today. And we'll see you next week on the porch.